Welcome to the Town Hall, EXO Communities number 12. We appreciate you being here. We have a very special guest today, and we're going to be talking about the future of all of this, all the new things coming out in the metaverse, the blockchain, the crypto, and finance, the monetary system in general. So I want to get straight to our host. Let me introduce Kent Langley. He's our COO at OpenExO and the mastermind behind our blockchain, the EXOS token, and we're about to have a 4th birthday, so stay tuned for that. Take it away, Kent.
4th birthday. I can't even believe it. We had our genesis of the EXOS token, Nikki, in April of 2018. And remember, this was on 04/08 at 1600 hours, 32 minutes and 00 seconds, which we pretended was infinity. So it has been almost 4 years, and I can't even believe it. We've learned so much along the way. And along the way today, Nikki, we have a few things that we want to share about the trajectory of the token. Again, we've shared some of these things publicly already, but we'll be reiterating that. And we also have, as my co-host today, Salim Ismail is on, and he'll be helping in very much to lead today's call as well. And the guest that we have is Paul Saffo. And Paul Saffo is joining us. He's a very forward thinker, a futurist. I first met Paul in 2013 at Singularity University, where I was attending and meeting Salim for the first time and attending Singularity University's executive program. So I've known Paul now for 9 years and been tracking his work, and I'm super excited that he carved out some time to be with us today. With all that, I just want to get right into it. We got exciting announcements about a new documentary that has just come out featuring the EXO economy and the EXOS token, if you can imagine, and starring Salim Ismail. So that one, I don't know if we're able to show a clip or anything. That's probably too much to ask since we just got the link a little while ago. But we'll talk about that too as we go through, Nikki. So everybody who's watching, these are some of the things that we're going to do today. So that's your, what do they call that? There's your cold open. Probably not from the Screen Actors Guild good, but that's a cold open and we're ready to go. You don't want to log off. You don't want to do anything. Don't even get up and go get coffee. You're good. You're going to get all the stimulation you need. So let's do this. Let's get Salim on and keep moving. Hey, Salim, welcome.
Hey there.
Tell us where we're going today.
Well, I think we're going to have a fascinating conversation with Paul Saffo, who is one of the more profound thinkers in the world. So let's bring Paul on and let's jump right into it.
Let's do it.
Well, that certainly was a low-key introduction.
Well, we have limited time, so we wanted to jump into it first. I wanted to mention
it was that profound thinker. That guy couldn't make it, but I've
Paul, I've got the paragraph. Let me.
No.
Are you sure? Sure?
Right. I was just that profound thinker part. I disagree with.
Oh, so, okay. Yeah. Welcome to our show.
Thank you.
So, folks, to set a bit of context, Paul was the head of future studies and forecasting at Singularity University. He's the key professor in the Stanford Engineering School, advises the governments around the world on all sorts of things.
You can stop anytime, Salim.
Singapore, for example, which is one of the only countries that actually actively does futures studies, etc. Paul was the one who convinced me to write the book. He said, "Oh, this lecture, you should turn it into a book." So I'm still cursing him on that one for that one here and there.
I also told you to throw out your first draft.
Paul,
it's also Paul's fault that I'm here too. So there you
go. Paul, welcome.
Great. Yeah. The way things are going, I'm probably going to have a process server show up at my door.
There you go. So let's just get into it right now. We're dealing with a profound inflection point from traditional monetary systems, and with more and more attention and money going into the crypto world. I wonder if you could frame historically what's happening, because you have a way of looking into the past and then into the future like few others.
Sure. And by the way, when we talked the other day, you made a very profound statement about humanity approaching a fork, and I'm going to make sure we get back to that. Whenever we get a new technology, we always collectively sit around and scratch our heads wondering what the heck it's good for. And that's what we're doing with digital technology. And we keep coming up with ideas. And then, of course, the initial stage is we do silly things. And some of it makes sense, some of it doesn't make sense. And that's what we're doing with crypto. It's like, wow, this is an amazing invention. What could we possibly use it for? And that's why we're exploring the money part. And as the whole story of the last 50 years is things are becoming more abundant. Hat tip to Peter. At the same time, we're obsessed with scarcity. And a really key concept is every new abundance creates an adjacent scarcity. And so whenever you see something become newly abundant, ask yourself, okay, what's this going to make very, very scarce? But back to your primary premise, the way I think of crypto today, well, Bitcoin was the first cryptocurrency good enough to criticize, but it's a transitional phase. And others are a little bit more like after the printing press emerged in Europe in the 1450s and publishing took off in one. The Catholic Church opposed the printing press until they realized they could use it to print papal indulgences and make a fortune. And then they thought it was great. Well, I look at a lot of variations on cryptocurrency and I go, it's kind of like papal indulgences meets chain letters.
Okay.
Oh God.
So I guess we get a general view of your world. Jeff Booth made an important point that we are growing our global economy via debt. And over time, this is the statistic I've got it right. In 2015, we had 50 trillion in global GDP and the world was 85 trillion in debt. Roll forward 4 or 5 years, just before the pandemic, we were 85 trillion in global GDP and 280 trillion in debt. And the challenge is, how do we navigate that in the future without some radical correction in the system?
Well, short answer is let's make sure we screw up on that life extension immortality thing, and then it's just our children's problem.
Okay, that's the current working practice.
Yeah, that's the hypothesis. So let us keep in mind that debt has two functions. You can use debt to you can create debt. It's borrowing from the future, and you can use it to build things now that make the future better.
Yeah.
Or you can use all of this sudden wealth to throw a party and make things worse. And that's, again, I don't want to imply that I'm stuck in the 16th century, but the rush of silver and gold from the New World had the same insane effect on Spain and Portugal. And the only difference this time is we're not stealing the money from unsuspecting other regions of the world. We are parts of it, coltan and all that, but it's basically we're in essence we're kind of doing to ourselves what in the past we did with colonization.
We're just colonizing our kids.
Yeah, in a way. But I think the key question, to me, the really big question is, are we using this wisely and well to create a better future, or are we amusing ourselves to death, in the words of Neil Postman?
Neil Postman, yeah.
Well, I have a quick question, Paul. You said that Bitcoin is a transitional phase, and then you've said we've created this wealth, and then you sort of insinuated about where the money's coming from. So those three things together, where did the money come from, right? If we're mining something, what are we really mining? Salim said we're mining our children. I don't know. That's a little, I hate to think that's the truth. Well, trying to make it better.
Bitcoin is not wealth. Bitcoin is currency.
Okay.
And at that level, it's not even clear what kind of currency it is yet. I think it's going to take about 10 years to realize what we just did. I remember back in 1999, I gave a bunch of my friends this, or actually 1995, the same book for Christmas, and that was Charles Mackay's late Victorian classic, Extraordinary Popular Delusions and the Madness of Crowds. And It covers tulipomania, all of the manias that we know about are there. And it's a very relevant book today. In his introduction to the third edition, he said, "Men has been well said, go mad in crowds and come to their senses only slowly and one by one." Well, there is a bunch of madness of crowds to Bitcoin and to all cryptocurrencies. And then some very savvy people are actually using it to create real wealth. But for the most part, this is a mass mania, and you just want to be sure you get out before everybody comes to their senses.
Interesting.
But one key thing here on technology is that, you know, the foundation that Bitcoin is built on is cryptology. And you're starting to see for the first time people, you know, Salim, Kent, you and I talked about this, you know, back in 2013. It now has a name, the quantum apocalypse.
Mm-hmm.
And if we get strong quantum and suddenly there are no secrets, that it's going to, you know, and Bitcoin, the whole foundation of Bitcoin dissolves. And it kind of reminds me that in Sweden in the late 1980s, I think it was the early 80s, they went to itemized phone bills. And before then, they just gave you a flat rate. There was a rash of divorces in Sweden immediately following it, because it turned out that all these Swedish men had been calling their mistresses from home, not thinking that one day their spouse would see the phone number. So just contemplate for a second what this will do to the institution of marriage and cheating spouses when the quantum apocalypse arrives.
So I was so funny that you mentioned the quantum apocalypse. I was just reading Kai-Fu Lee's newer book, AI 2041. And in there's a short story. I can't remember the exact title of the story, but it was basically exactly that. There's a small group of hackers that uses a new quantum computer to crack Satoshi's wallet. And then all the ensuing events, which basically is the apocalypse that happened after that, is it's an extraordinary short read. By far the strongest in the book so far. I'm not finished the book, so maybe there's something better coming. But I would definitely recommend that if anybody's like tickled by what Paul just said, because I like to think, though, Paul, that they will upgrade the cryptographic proofs that are necessary long before the quantum computers are able to crack that. But who knows? Who knows?
So, hey, we couldn't even get Y2K right.
We're still here.
So let me come at this from another angle, because I'd love to steer it towards what you think what the future look like.
Yeah.
In 2010, you got up on stage and you said the U.S. I suspect a 50% chance the U.S. will not exist as a country in 30 years. And every 2 years, some of the things you said would happen are happening with extraordinary kind of regularity. The 50% is a nice hedge because you can couch your predictions nicely there. But everything you said would happen is happening. What do you see as the future of nation states and city states? And would you mind, for the audience that doesn't remember, go and recap that, or I can do it for you because I remember it burned into my memory.
Oh, yeah. Well, okay. So, the point, I mean, the point I was making at the time was that the international order everybody took for granted and had thought existed since time immemorial was actually a novelty. And so a nation as we know it, you know, the pedantic types will take you back to the 30 Years' War and the Treaty of Westphalia and all that. But really, for practical purposes, a nation really didn't exist until the late 1800s. Passports did not exist in a meaningful way until the 20th century, early 20th century. So that you work on the assumption that a nation state is a transitional phase to some other kind of governance. And the nation state has been on the wane for 60 years. So once upon a time, this is lawyer speak. The only person at international law, the only entity recognized in international law, was a nation state. Well, with the Universal Declaration of Human Rights and the UN Charter, all of a sudden, individuals on certain circumstances and NGOs got recognition. So we've been fuzzing what is a nation state and what is international law. But quite simply, I think the proximate cause is that the economic, social, and cultural center of gravity has moved away over the last 4 decades, away from the nation as the default unit to the city-state as a default unit. There are some actual city-states like Singapore and Dubai and the like, but I also mean cities are aggregations of economic, social, and cultural power. So think of the Greater Bay Area that, sure, if California became an independent nation, we'd be the world's 6th largest economy. If the Bay Area, 9 Bay Area counties left the United States, we would be the world's 15th largest economy. Our economy would be larger than that of Switzerland. And the thing about a city state is it is big enough to have a global impact. Think of, what Silicon Valley gave the world, but small enough that everybody knows where they fit. They call the CEOs they've never met by their first name, Zuck or Steve or whatever. And it's a cultural identity and the like. And you have members of a city state who are full members, but may not be American citizens, like Indian entrepreneurs and like. So that's what the shift has been. And the only question is, how will nation states go? Will they go quietly into the future, or will they will they fight this order?
So we're seeing this tension between nation and city states. I remember thinking about the idea that Brexit and Trump are really about urban versus rural rather than left versus right, right? And so if we roll this carpet out and we assume that the future locus of kind of power sits more with the cities, which it kind of does now. There's books called When Mayors Rule the World, et cetera, et cetera. I remember you making this amazing comment that everybody in the world knows who the mayor of New York City is, and nobody in the world knows who the governor of the state of New York is. Even if you're in New York, you have no idea who the governor is. Showing that shift happening already, certainly with the bigger cities, and that they're bigger and more complex than any country was 100 years ago. So if you go down that future, then do currencies end up getting created by cities? Because right now currencies sit at a fiat level with a mess of 200, global fiat currencies. Where do you think we end up with that?
With currency specifically? Yeah. And I haven't answered a larger question, but let me stick at that. So by coincidence, I was talking with my students this quarter. Oh, and by the way, I'm just an adjunct professor at Stanford. I'm required to say that. I get in trouble with the dean. So I'm scab labor. That think about the history of money is so well documented that if you want to understand crypto, you got to understand the history of currency and the like, keeping in mind that even in periods of the most rapid change, there are deep constants that really frame the stage. And the deepest constant is the nature of human behavior. We're all crazier than bed bugs, and people are going to do all the same crazy things. So, keep in mind, I won't even bother to show the Zimbabwean currency because everybody's seen that a million times. But, here is one Venezuelan bolivar, and here is 100 million Venezuelan bolivars. But in terms of private money, that's the key thing, is that cryptocurrency is private money. There's governmental money and there's private money. And the history of private money is marked by the notion of Gresham's law, famous rule. And it was the United States right after the Civil War when all the banks started printing their own money. And Gresham's law states that bad money drives out good. So, maybe we have Tamagotchi coin instead. But one of my favorites is this. This is, my camera is backwards. And so this is French Revolutionary money. This is from year one of the French Revolution. And I don't think I could cash it for anything. So what we're going to see, the short answer, we're going to see a continuing proliferation of monetary forms, and they're all going to fight to see who can they get the most people to believe that they're worth something. And that's exactly what they're worth, is whatever people believe they're worth.
Well, Salim, an interesting current, one of these is the Miami coin. You live in Miami. Have you experienced Miami coin at all yet personally, or is it just something you've heard about?
He just sniffs the cocaine off the coin.
I was talking to the mayor. I was talking to the mayor's office, and important to note, a lot of the boom around Miami is partly because we ran a fast track there 3 years ago and laid a lot of the vocabulary down. So we have some blame in what's happening here. The Miami coin, the mayor's office was super excited because all of a sudden they had some cash that they could use that wasn't coming from taxpayers. And it was like this has never happened before in the history of governance, where we have access to resources that we can kind of do what we want with. And so they're super excited by that, which is partly why they sanctioned it. The rest of it is fairly questionable, including the fact that if I get it right, the U.S. Constitution forbids currency other than the U.S. dollar. Am I right? So how is that going to work over time?
Well, I mean, if you want, just we used to have what was called M1, and then there's M2, M3.
Yeah.
So just look at, we're going to have, an infinite number of M's appear, and we've had virtual currencies for a long time. Think of LIBOR, that sovereign loans were denominated in LIBOR way back in the 1980s. And I looked everywhere. I couldn't seem to find a piece of paper with a LIBOR on it. Can't.
Well, I think, we did something here back in 2018. We're running a kind of a grand experiment of whether you can create a currency. In our case, it's called EXOS, Paul, and whether you can create a currency that operates inside of a community privately for a period of time, probably growing in utility or use cases over time, and then help find that currency its path to public markets so it can trade with other fungible currencies on a global level. We're still on that journey. We're in the liquidity seeking phase of that journey. It's been absolutely fascinating. And to your point about learning about money, if anybody's interested, there's a series of books, and I've not seen the one that you mentioned earlier, which sounds fascinating, but there's a series of books on the history of money that I don't think would have ever existed if Bitcoin hadn't been created. So people's awareness and learning about money has accelerated as well, which is pretty wild because money's always just sort of been there.
Okay. So let me reframe this, because this money thing ties to the nation state, city state thing, and goes to what you were intimating at the very start. As a forecaster, I find in general, whatever people are talking about, it's a good indicator of what's important, but it's not what's important, that there's something usually behind it. And really behind this one, in the future of money and the debate, are we becoming more abundant or more scarce, is a deeper question. And that is, what is the nature of a moral economy in the digital age? And a moral economy is an economy of relationships, of give and take, and reasonable equality. And the term goes back a while, but if someone wants to look it up, I'd start with E.P. Thompson, wrote The Moral Economy of the English Peasant. But another guy who was very interesting, a good example, is James C. Scott, professor at Yale. And he wrote a classic, The Moral Economy of the Peasant, in Southeast Asia, sort of Vietnam War era. And here's how a moral economy works. It naturally works at a village level. So the three of us live in a village together. It's we're rice farmers, and Kent, you have a really great year farming rice. Salim has kind of a bad year, and so he goes to you and he says, Kent, can you loan me some rice so I can get through the dry season? And you say, sure, here, pay back whenever. And you do it freely, because next year, with the chances of weather, the uncertainty, the shoe may be on the other foot, and you will need money, rice from Salim. And so a moral economy is one where it's stable, there are clear relationships, there's give and take, and everybody understands what the rewards for good behavior are. The problem with the moral economy in a globalized world is you may be having a transaction with someone you'll never see again. And so that creates the opportunity for selfish strategic behaviors. And so really the question is, I mean, what we're torn between right now is hyper-local. We care more about the city we live in than the nation we live in, but we're also hyper-global in that, we're at this moment where we're very aware that there's an entire globe, and also there's stuff beyond, that space is happening. And the question is, how do we thread the sense of moral economy through all that? And to me, that's the focus. It's not, what's the next generation of chips are like. It's how do we use all of this complexity and all this new power to create a global moral economy.
Is there a good example of a moral economy that you've seen in the past? Because they all seem to be fairly extractive in general.
Well, village cultures work really well.
Okay.
And so we have lots of examples that we have lots of small communities that had moral economies.
Yeah.
And the question, and they still exist today. The question is, how do you make them scale? By the way, the one other detail I keep in mind, the global population of stateless is of course growing. And when you say stateless, you think of people trapped in refugee camps and the like. But it turns out that statelessness is much more complex. And James Scott also wrote about this a little bit, like the Karen in Southeast Asia. They don't want to be part of a state. They are perfectly happy being stateless. So what may be beyond the nation state is large populations of communities that really want to stay stateless.
So that is fascinating. I said something, and I know it. I said this, and I didn't mean it in a way that could be insensitive. So I'll caveat that. But what if someone wanted to be a refugee, right? But this word statelessness is much nicer. So I think I just heard a story of a family that's been traveling the world. They call them the Bitcoin family. This was in the news today. They cashed out everything they had when Bitcoin was $900. They traveled to 40 countries. And now just today, I read a story that they've decided to settle in Portugal, because Portugal has 0% taxation on cryptocurrencies, and that's what their currency is in. So for a while now, they've effectively chosen to be stateless. And as you know, if you move frequently enough, you actually avoid having to pay any taxes in each of those locations. As long as you move, I don't remember, it's different in different places, but we've seen a number of people do this. Fascinating, but even they did decide to stop. And I'll add one other quick thing is we're also doing a lot of work, Paul, on distributed autonomous organizations. Over time, humanity has chosen many, many ways to organize. One of those is current organizational models, organizations. Salim wrote a little book, a little bit about some of exponential organizations. We've got cooperatives. Yeah. We've got cooperatives, which have been around for hundreds, if not thousands of years, looking at things like the Mongol.
So here's where this goes to.
Yep.
Is maybe we get back to kind of a neo-medieval notion of what it means to belong. That if you had wandered into the marketplace in Istanbul in 1200, 1300, that you have all these cultures and they're all living by different community rules. So if there is a conflict between, a European seller or buyer and a local seller and buyer, that it's adjudicated based on their own system. So even though you might be, so let's say you're a member of the EXO, you identify with the EXO tribe, and you are governed by the rules of the EXO tribe. And Salim is a member of the Microsoft tribe and governed by the rules of the Microsoft tribe. Then each one of you has you carry your nation with you wherever you go. And so
Right.
I have a feeling we're going to start going towards that, where people will identify what rules they live by what's on their sleeve.
So what's the role of the nation state when that happens en masse?
Well, think about what the role of the nation state has been. is security and stability and policy. If populations are becoming ever more mobile, that becomes ever less relevant. Your example of Portugal, by the way, the couple that moved to Portugal, they missed it by 4 years.
Wow.
Yeah, this is. We all have friends who are like trying to figure out where to live,
Got
and it kind of reminds me of a whole bunch of people in an airplane, and
Yeah.
someone points out the window and goes, "Wow, look at that!" Everybody on the airplane goes to that window, and then somebody else on the other side goes, "Oh, look at this one!" And the poor pilot's trying to do this. Portugal's over. I mean, it's a lovely place,
Interesting.
but sensible people wouldn't move there.
Well, I guess but the thing is, they can just pick up and move again because
Well, but that's the
currency,
problem. So now,
yeah.
if you can pick up and move to the next place, then who stays and takes care of that place?
Yeah. Well,
And
I
and
don't
so
know.
in a way, people who are picking up and just moving to Portugal because of the advantages of tax stuff, they're parasites.
We have an audience question related to this, so let me throw it in there, Paul. This is from Augusto. He is a longtime community member of OpenExO. Hi, Augusto. It's great to see you out there. Thanks for being here today. What about practical effects of statelessness? For example, wouldn't trading among city-states be a nightmare of different regulations?
Oh, spot on, Augusto. That this is the problem, that city-states, mayors don't want to take on national defense. And city-states are going to stay focused on what's local for them and only get forced into, they're going to say that's somebody else's problem. And so this is why everybody might know them, actually, might know the name of the mayor in New York, but it's why, the World Economic Forum every year always has, the global mayors session. And they're always waiting for the global mayors to step up and do something outside their city limits, and they never do. So that's not going to change. And then it gets really complicated. One of my favorite virtual city states is down in Southern California. You could call it San Tijuana Calexico, because the mega region of San Diego, Tecate, Tijuana crosses the international border. And everybody down there, no matter what their political persuasion is, we said, just get rid of the darn border, because we got to cross back and forth. You got people living in Tijuana who have the kids going to school in San Diego, and the like, and it itself is an indicator of something else. So the growth of the San Diego Tijuana mega region is determined to not have that border.
I remember you once saying that border doesn't want to exist.
Exactly. The two aspects. One, it does not want to exist. And two, in periods of slow change, 60 years ago, we were frozen in the Cold War. Power resided in the national capitals. It resided in Washington, D.C., and Moscow and Paris. In this age where, very simply put, digital technology is the solvent leaching the glue out of our international institutions. And the action, global policy is no longer made in capitals. Global policy is made at borders. It's made on the San Diego-Mexico border. It's made on the border between Ukraine and Russia. It is, out in the western part of China. And a whole bunch of politicians in the capitals think they're still in charge, when in fact they're just passengers on a train where nobody's at the controls. I am an optimist, by the way.
I am too. It's so funny. I asked you what's the role of the nation state in the future, and you mentioned guns and soldiers, basically, and then the mayors don't want to do that. So if I'm a mayor and the nation state still has the guns and the soldiers, then they become my militia. I don't know.
Well, then what it is, then this is the crime gang, paying tribute problem, that the national governments are going to put the squeeze on regions to pay tribute, in effect. But one of the things that dissolved the nation state, I mean, in a very real sense, the nation state already doesn't exist. We just haven't figured out which yet. the moment that we had intercontinental ballistic missiles, so the exact same technology that made ICBMs possible, the microprocessor that launched the digital revolution, pretty much ended sovereignty. Because before the ICBM, a nation state always had borders and it had refuge inland. They could control their borders and control what invaded. The moment you had nuclear weaponry on ICBMs, there was no nation on this planet that could claim that it had full security over its territory.
Wow.
That's big. Yeah, you made me remember that a fish doesn't realize it's swimming in the water.
Marshall
kind of
McLuhan
thing. Yeah.
famously said,
Yeah.
I don't know who discovered water, but it was most assuredly not a fish.
Exactly. That's the one. All right. So I'm going to do something here. We have a quick announcement. So just a little pause on the panel discussion. We can collect our thoughts. Salim, you went to Dubai about a year ago, and you spent time there at AIBC. And while you were there, you got followed around a little bit by a camera crew. So do you want to tell us just a little bit about that? And then we'll let everybody know, and we'll post the links up to the documentary that just came out.
Yeah, I was speaking at the Dubai Bitcoin conference, and there was a heyday of 500 people in a big hall in the middle of the pandemic, which was just madness.
I remember getting texts from you. Holy shit, there's no masks.
So I was staying away from the crowds as much as possible.
Take
but
Bill Clinton's advice, don't inhale.
But definitely the whole, Paul, what you talked about, the kind of the irrational exuberance mode was absolutely in full swing, right? It reminded me of the Miami Bitcoin conference just before the pandemic, where one of our ecosystem members actually presented and had two 15-foot tall robots that were doing flamethrowing on stage while he was doing his talk, and you're like, okay, we're way over the jump the shark here. But the conference was really fascinating in terms of discussing the role of the future and how this navigates, because it's kind of, there's a whole bunch of inquiry where people are realizing that nation states don't work. If nation states don't work, then fiat currencies don't work, and then what is the future? And there were some really fascinating conversations to that end. So that was the context of the whole, one of the contexts of the rather big discussion.
So you went there to talk about two things. One, the EXO economy and EXOs a little bit, and then two, a sort of a strategic alliance we found to push the envelope of what it means to be alive or dead. So if you could just say one or two sentences about Nectome and EXOs, and then we've got about a 1-minute reel that we want to roll.
Okay.
So as soon as you're done there, we'll roll that reel.
So for context for Paul and others that weren't aware, there's some ex-MIT folks called Nectome have demonstrated full the brain preservation to preserve all the key elements of information, so that a brain, if somebody died, you could treat it and you could resurrect or reinvigorate that brain at some later date when we have the proper mechanisms and tool. The key is preservation. And what we did was we to provoke the conversation, we basically said, let's sponsor with our EXOS token 5 lives. Like if Stephen Hawking suddenly died just now, maybe we could preserve that brain, or Paul's brain, or Christopher Hitchens' brain, or whoever's, and who would we nominate for this? And it was just to provoke that conversation.
Yeah.
That we did that. So
how would we have that conversation? So I don't know that the clips about that, the clips about the documentary that came out where you talk about that some more. So Kevin, if we could go ahead and roll that clip, and when we come back.
The world is at a crossroads. We are standing before a choice.
If you look back in the history of civilization, right? You had the Romans, the Incas, the Mayans, the Aztecs. They all got to very sophisticated models, and then they hit a boundary condition and they suddenly collapsed. We've gotten that same level of sophistication. You talk to the Niall Fergusons or the Yuval Hararis, all the conditions that led to the collapse of the Roman Empire, the collapse of the Incas are all there now. We have to navigate it more elegantly so that we don't end up in 300 years of the Dark Ages. And that's the work of, I think, this generation. I think this next 20, 30 years will dictate the next 300 years of humanity.
Don't miss the future. The future is now.
Wow, the music. Okay, that was very dramatic.
Full drama.
I'm just trying to get my head around the fact of a meeting where Salim's the most conservative person in the room.
Right? I know.
It's frightening, isn't it?
It is. So that documentary released this week. We will post a hashtag and a link down here somewhere, so everybody can see that and in the chat. So please do take some time if you want to see the extended version of what Salim and all of the folks that were profiled there. And the Future is Now Media created that with us, and Miguel Francis is the director, and he's the gentleman who put all that together. So thank you, Miguel, for the fine work, and thanks for sharing that out with us. We've got another question from the audience, so I think that'd be a great way to jump back in. So this one is completely from a different place. Canada. We know things are crazy up there in Canada. And so Paul and then Salim, what is your take on the trucker demonstrations in Ottawa?
You go first, Salim.
There's enough crazy Canadians to do some stuff like this. They're defacing statues of Terry Fox, who's a kind of an icon of Canadian resilience and grit. So it's quite a mess up there. I think this is a backlash of 2 years of fairly conservative policies around COVID. For the most part, it's worked. The death rate is incredibly lower than the U.S. for the most part, but people are frustrated. In 2 years, 2 winters stuck at home without being able to go out drives anybody batty, and I think that's 80% of what's going on.
Yeah, I think it's just local phenomena or local expression of a larger global phenomena, and things started going south the moment we had the picture of the whole Earth from space. So it's Stuart Brown's fault. That what happened is everybody feels cast adrift. That the net effect of digital technology and all this abundance and everything else, just the whole ball of wax, is it delivered us to this frontier of terrible, overwhelming freedom. And with freedom and choice comes the responsibility to choose wisely and well. And the thing that humans need more than anything else is a sense of meaning and purpose. And everybody has been cast adrift in this digital ocean, and they're looking for meaning wherever they can find it. The false god of, political strongmen and weird religious fantasies and stuff. And so I think what you're seeing is it's just classical tribal stuff, that they're a bunch of folks with big trucks and they like to get together, and it gives them meaning to complain about something. And it's a lot easier to complain than it is to come up with a solution.
So can't wait to see what happens if they form a DAO. That'll be something, right? And then launch their own cryptocurrency and then become a tribe roaming the earth with their giant trucks. Yeah.
The civilizational examples that Salim sort of breezily went over, the Inca, the Maya, and everyone else. The important thing is that civilizations collapse beneath their own contradictions, and it's when a civilizational structure. Now, I will excuse the Maya and the Inca, though, because this story was complicated by the invasion of Europeans. But that you have this civilizational senescence that sets in, and the question is, this moment in time, our civilization, quote civilization. I'm always reminded of the famous quip of Gandhi, who, when he returned to London after he was famous, and the reporter rushed up to him and said, "What do you think of Western civilization, sir?" And he replied, "I think it'd be a very good idea." That we're at once very old and very young as a global culture. And so we're dealing with the senescence of all the old stuff. But at the same time, we have the vast frontier of very new things and very few rules. And we're trying to negotiate that frontier.
What was it your father said, Salim, about
Yeah,
civilization?
I did this
Yes.
talk called Fixing Civilization, really talking about our need to solve the immune system problem to allow new breakthroughs to be absorbed more quickly. And my father said, disagree with your talk. And I said, oh, do you not think we need to fix civilization? He says, yeah, of course we need to fix it. The problem is not that. We've not civilized the world. We have materialized the world. Now we have the job to do to civilize the world, which I thought was a very profound comment. Wisdom of the elders, etc. I lost all credibility in the room after that comment, naturally.
Sorry.
I have a question for you, Paul. What do you think is the future of DAOs? Is it a real thing, or do you think it's, again, an artifact of the other conversation around crypto?
I think it's, again, the same instance. It's a nexus of everybody standing around scratching their heads about how do we use this technology? And DAOs are on their way. They're a waypoint to new kinds of organizations. Whenever we have a new technology, the first thing we always do with it is we improve on a process we've been doing all along. We use it to imitate something old. And then after a while, we get bored with that, and then we start actually innovating. So my favorite example is that of plastic. So the first modern plastic was invented by William Bakelite in the early part of the 20th century. It's called Bakelite. And everybody spent all their time trying to make it look like wood and tortoiseshell. And then after about 10 years, everybody realized it made really ugly wood and tortoiseshell substitute, said, let's let plastic be plastic, and things got interesting. Well, the DAOs we're trying to, it goes back to that meaning globalization things. How do we organize in a meaningful way using this technology? And so I think it's a period of really interesting, powerful experimentation. But, the deeper question, and Salim, this is probably best reserved for one of your late night conversations about the meaning of everything. But, I think at the end of the day, are we just the step beyond what your father said? We're not civilized, we're materialized. The next phase is we're going to dematerialize.
Yeah.
And then, think of, Venedeschi, and Teilhard de Chardin, and the notion of the noosphere, and that what we're really creating here is we're slouching towards the noosphere, not towards a teleological noosphere like Chardin thought, but maybe it's a non-teleological thing, which means it's gonna, the future is going to be even weirder than we imagined.
Well, you look at the rise of the metaverse, et cetera, et cetera. What's your quick comment on Facebook changing its name?
Well, it was pretty obvious. It's the problem that, there were too many old people on Facebook for it to be cool with the kids. And there are more kids and so they were, it's a Hail Mary pass for relevance. It was so lame by Facebook, they couldn't even come up with their own original name for the metaverse. They had to borrow it from Neil Stephenson, who pulled it out of the zeitgeist and the like. So yeah, it's pathetic. And also, VR glasses are still got a long ways to go. And so,
Paul, you reminded me of, we know the 6 Ds from Kotler and Diamandis: digitalization, deception, disruption, demonetization. Dematerialization is right after demonetization there. And I think people don't think about that one as much. You tend to even just hear people talk about the 4 Ds even these days. Everybody's given up on the other 2 Ds, with dematerialization being one of those. And you've just connected that back in there. And I think that's really something, as you said, for some deeper thought. But that was in the context of the DAO question. And I think in one way, DAOs are nothing new, but in another way, they've been crypto monetized, which allows them to fully dematerialize. And that's pretty new.
Yeah. But, if you go all the way out, it's wonderful having Salim lead this conversation, because there are all sorts of things Salim says in small groups that don't get out. But one of the things I was thinking about, Salim, I mean, what's the purpose of this whole
What
thing?
you're saying is keep Salim in small groups. Don't let him out.
No,
Really what you're saying here. I'm kidding.
I think some of my most important ideas have come from misunderstanding you, Salim.
That's great.
But when you start thinking, I mean, we're at a moment where, again, something you and I have talked about before. I'm on record as saying we're way overdue for a major new religion. And I mean, Nietzsche put it nicely 100 years ago when he said nearly 2,000 years and no new God. Well, given all that's changing, we're going to see a major new religion emerge in the next 10, 20 years. But here's a deeper question: is like, what is this all about? And what is this new frontier? We're pushing out in space, we're going in directions. And you mentioned the folks at MIT and Nectome and stuff, but forget the brain. The question is, what's consciousness? And at some level, a philosopher friend said, well, to me, he said, well, maybe we're here. We're an example of the universe having a conversation with itself. And one of the most provocative ideas is if you're not familiar with David Chalmers, look him up. He is arguing that consciousness is not an emergent phenomena in the way we think, that consciousness is a quality of the universe that is comparable to, say, gravity or space-time. And that to me is without getting teleological, is like, well, why are we here? And maybe behind all the silly trading of Bitcoin and everything else, we're actually engaged in a really profound task that has implications far beyond our species.
Fascinating. I've wondered,
And
Paul, if
the consciousness discussion leads you straight into a rat hole, because you get into a definition problem, we get into testing issues. My favorite joke around this is, a subset of consciousness is self-awareness, and you look like you're self-aware, so I attribute self-awareness to you. I feel like I'm self-aware, but my wife disagrees. And where do you even start with that conversation?
Yeah, well, most men are not self-aware. We can eliminate that one right off the top. Maybe instead of a rat hole, Salim, is it leads us to a mountain peak on a mountain we don't even realize exists. It's T.S. Eliot in his in the Choruses from the Rock, that famous phrase that too many people quote without reading the entire poem, but we shall not cease from exploration, and the end of all our exploring will be to arrive where we started and know the place for the first time. Maybe that is the end point of all of this, is that process of discovery and not collecting more stuff on eBay.
The etymology behind religion, the word is religion, which means linking back. It's reconnecting, right? So there, I want to ask you a question. When you look in the landscape of what's happening today, which is kind of a hell of a hot mess globally, et cetera, what are the things that you're watching that pique your interest? Early indicators. What's kind of grabbing you right now?
Well, general advice on this as a forecaster, as you know, Salim, from our conversation, look for things that don't fit. Look for things that seem out of place. And it's the opposite of what we usually do, is we look for things that fit. So I just look for those little whisperings of things that say, well, this is really odd, and it doesn't seem to make any sense. And people can look those up for themselves.
When I look at the world today, like, everything doesn't fit, nothing fits in a sense. So
that's an indicator in its own right. Yeah.
Okay.
So your question, state your question again.
Well, what are you kind of twigging on? Like, you've got a better sensory perception with your forecaster's brain. What are the types of things for you that don't fit in categories?
Boy, you got a couple hours. And it, it's coming out of conversations with friends. I'm really intrigued about this statelessness that everybody's saying, all right, already, I want to be stateless. And that there are the voluntary stateless, like, would you like to be in Venezuela or would you rather be stateless? And then there's the super wealthy stateless. I'm curious about it. Well, one thing in particular, I talked about is what's going to happen with low Earth orbit. So one thing that I think I will offer is, it's not quite a forecast, it's a hunch, that if you really wanted to do serious crypto mining, low Earth orbit's a nice place to do it, because you're above the atmosphere, you've got lots of convertible energy in the form of sunlight. In theory, you can cool well, though there's some practical problems with it. But it was Will Rogers who said, buy real estate, they're not making any more of it. Well, we're actually making more of it, low Earth orbit, and also the Lagrange points. So it's a moment where we have whole new frontiers, and we're trying to figure out how to take advantage of those frontiers.
Yeah, well, gentlemen, this has been amazing. Paul, maybe we have to have a part 2 on statelessness if we can get you back in here again, because I would love to dig deep into that. You mentioned something, Paul, just a little while ago that I have to touch on. You talked about purpose. In the EXO model, we talk about the massive transformative purpose. In our community, we have, especially as part of the EXO economy, we have a core group that runs a grant process. And that grant process gives EXOs to projects to use to get the capabilities of members of our community to help them do things. And I really want to share just one community spot. This is about a 20-second video roll before we close out. So if everybody would just take a look at this incredible project and this very inspirational young man, Kieran, from the Exoskeleton Project. Can we roll that, please?
We are going to walk past the bench just a little bit, and we're going to turn. Alright, so whenever you're ready, you can do probably one more step, and then do feet together.
So that right there is something that is at least a little part made possible by people coming together in a DAO-like structure using a cryptocurrency called EXOS, operating on a global basis to help a gentleman named Kieran, who showed up as part of our community and inspired us to do so. And we call it the Exoskeleton Project. And we have dozens of examples like that. So I'm super optimistic about what's coming. I think that things like DAO are potentially, Paul, form of statelessness. I would love to debate that with you and think about what you say, hear what you have to say. But beyond that, I just want to thank you, really, really thank you, Paul, for joining us today. This has been fascinating. I wish we had another hour or two to go, but we've got to start to wrap up. Salim, any closing words? And then Paul.
No, I've had the subtle admonitions to think more carefully as I usually get from Paul, with all the wisdom that comes from that. I think there's extraordinary, it just highlights the amazing amount of work to do in trying to navigate this, because the explosion of technologies opening up, as Paul said, all these frontiers, and how do we navigate that in some sort of meaningful and sensible way? I think for me, the highlight was for today was really this idea of the moral economy. And Paul, I'd love if you have some resources or where we can read up more. What would you do to understand, if we're asking our ecosystem to understand that better, where would we go?
A couple of things. Well, I mentioned E.P. Thompson.
Yeah.
Our Center for Advanced Study in the Behavioral Sciences, CASBS, at Stanford, which this is where, we're doing a big project on the future of the moral economy. So I would look up CASBS as a good place to start. Also, just general advice. I worry about massive transformational purpose. The older I get, the more I get nervous about really big changes. And I'm here in the Bay Area, a lot of Zen Buddhists here, and you see a bumper sticker that reads, "Don't just do something, sit there." And at times I feel like what we need to do is think about big shifts have big unintended consequences. And we have to find a way to create massive transformation with lots of little steps where it can course correct and the like. And that the most important thing anyone can do is, of course, go for the big stuff, but take a few minutes today and do a kindness to someone else. Do
Yeah.
a little transformational act, and all those little transformational acts will aggregate into something big and sustainable.
Well, I couldn't agree more, Paul. We have a limited time here on this earth, and we should everybody hear what
session.
Yeah, hear what Paul just said. When you leave this session today, find a way to do a kindness to someone else. That is the best advice you will hear all day or any day, quite honestly. Paul, thank you so much. Salim, thank you very much. Gentlemen,
Awesome.
Always a pleasure. I'm going to turn it back over to Nikki, and everybody remember that the recording for this session will be available immediately on YouTube and on the EXO Insights. So it's exoinsights.com/videos. So Nikki, back over to you to close us out. And thank you again, Nikki and Kevin and Jill and people I'm forgetting behind the scenes. There's so many people behind the scenes that make a small show like this happen and bring it together so beautifully. So thank you, Nikki, and over to you. Put me back. Hi, Nikki, you're on mute. We can't hear you. Click that button. Okay.
Oh, sorry. Oh my gosh, I did it. We don't have a tip bot anymore.
Now you've got to go rewind that. Do it again. Nikki, over to you. Thank you.
Very good, very good. Thank you, everybody. Salim, you were awesome, inspiring, provoking. Kent, you were wonderful. And Paul, especially supercharged just to go back and rethink everything that you said. So I appreciate that. We've got a team in the background, Kevin and Jill, running the tech today. And then my EXOS angels are basically, the people that come together to do these kind, small things in the world. And they're small, but we have the aspiration to do them on a broader scale and to, like you said, scale. So all of these things coming together, look for the social media checks, go back to the replay on this. We'll start to, add some links and clips to get more conversation started. And I so appreciate you all for coming. EXOS Town Hall, 4th birthday coming up in April. So save the date, April 5th. Thank you.